Back again, and welcome back to another part of this mini series where we're going to be building out our security controller. So, without further ado, we're just going to jump straight into it because that's what we want to be doing. So, moving on from what we've done in our last couple of videos where we sort of like went through how we structured our controller, how we display templates, how we sort of like extend into a base layout template, we're going to do that process over again. But first, we're going to start within our router file. We're going to declare our security route, and we're going to also build our controller, and then we're going to work our way up until we can get a login form to display on our client side. So first thing first, we go into our config file. We're going to get our routes.yaml file, and down here I'm just going to type in security in lowercase security, and I'm going to declare a controller. I'm going to call our controller security, and I'm going to point to the index, or index action, I should say action. It's going to be index route, and actually I should point this to login. So we can type in /login, and it's going to hit that security controller and load that index action route by default, right? So that's as simple as it is to creating a route. We simply declare what we want the route to be called, like /login. We declare the controller name, which is going to be a security controller, and we declare the default action that we're going to hit. When we first call up that login route, we're going to hit that default route, which is index action, right? So now that we've done that, the second thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and create that controller file. So that's going to be within my controller directory. I'm going to create a new file and call it security controller, just like so. So now that I've got my security controller, as I'm saying, the process is going to be similar. So we're going to be using the declaration strict types. We're going to say namespace up, and that's going to be controller, and class is going to be security controller, just like so. We're going to define our public construct method, public construct. It's not auto completed for us this time for some reason, but let's put that in. So it's parent : construct, and we're going to pass that route params argument in that we need to define in our main constructor. It's going to be route params, and we also need to add our definition. And the reason why we're not getting that autocomplete is because we have not actually extended that base controller. So we need to go ahead, extend base controller, just like so, right? Add definition method not found, might be add definitions. Yep, just like so. So we're going to just go ahead and start building this out. Then we're going to look at what sort of dependencies we need to be loading, right? So the method that we're going to be creating is that index method. So I'm going to say protected function, and it's going to be index action, right? Just like so. So the next step that I want to do is I want to create the HTML template. So I'm going to say in my templates directory, I'm going to create a security directory within this client directory. So new directory, security, and again we're going to be calling the HTML file index.html because the method is index.html. So I'm going to say new file, which is an HTML file, it's going to be index, right? Just like so. I'm going to immediately clear these out because don't need those. I'm going to extend that layout, that HTML template that we created in the last video. I'm going to say extends layout.html, just like so. Right, so now that we've got our basic route defined within our YAML file, we got our controller file, which that route points to, and we got our default template. We can just say something like this view. I'm going to pass our template in, which is going to be client security, and it's going to be index.html, just like so. So I'm going to go on the front end, switch my screen, we're going to load this up, and we're going to see what happened. But before I do that, actually, I should sort of like yield the content area for this file. I'm going to put in security so you know we're hitting that actual template. To say block content say end block. I'm going to say h1 security, just like so. So I'm going to switch my screen now so we can actually load this template up and see if we're going to be getting this h1. So I'll switch my screen, and that is what we were displaying from our last video. So if I reload, we're still going to get that because we've not pointed yet to that security controller. And as I was saying, we defined it within that YAML file. We had that login. So when we define that login in the URL in the browser, we're going to be hitting that security controller, and then we're going to be hitting that index action. So let's do that. So let's say /login. And what is it saying? Security index.html file does not exist. So let's have a little investigation and see where that error is coming from, where we've made an error. So view client security index.html. I'm sure that's all that it's supposed to be. We've got a misspelling somewhere, so let's look at this. Security, yeah, we've got a misspelling, so let's just rename that. Let's refactor that. So security, just like so. Let's try that again, and there we go. So we've corrected that misspelling, and now we're hitting that h1 tag that we've just defined, and we've just written security. So we know that we're now hitting that login, our security controller, and we now go straight directly to that index action method, right? So, but there's a lot more to add to this particular controller. I'm just going to go through it bit by bit, and I will explain to you as I go along. So I'm going to switch my screen again, back into our template, and into our editor, I should say. Let's close this down. In our security controller, what exactly is it that we need? We need some kind of form to display a login, right? So that's something that we're going to need. And we also need to pass that login form to our template. Unlike other framework where we sort of like declare our template and then we go and build out our login form, this is a little bit different. As I mentioned in a few videos back, it's just a complete object-oriented framework. So 99% of everything that we're going to be creating is going to be done within a class file. So even down to building our forms is going to be done in a class file. So we're going to be creating a folder. We're going to create a folder structure. We're going to create that login form. We're going to be building that out, and then we're going to change the syntax that we've got in the index action, and I'm going to explain to you what that syntax is doing. So within our main app directory, let's just close this down. I'm going to create a new directory called form. And this is where all of our forms are going to be, both client side and admin. So form, our forms, I think that's what it's looking for. So let's just refactor that quickly. Call it forms. And within our form, we're going to create a client subdirectory. Just say new directory. It's going to be client. Within that directory, I'm going to create another subdirectory, and this is going to be called security. So everything that relates to the security controller form-wise is going to be within the security directory. So I'm going to say security. Spell that right again, just like so. Now I'm going to create my login form, and I normally name it. I normally say like login form. That's normally how I name my files. So I'm just create a new file, a PHP file. I'm going to say login form, just like so. Right now, I need to remind myself of the various component that builds up this login form, so I can basically just talk you through it and show you all the bits that need to be imported. Right, so every form within this particular framework, the basic layout and the basic class structure is going to be the same, with the only difference being the kind of inputs that we want for our form to contain. But in terms of the classes that we're bringing in, they're all going to be the same. And I've developed quite a lot of different, I've developed a form builder component, which is something that I've never actually gone through on any video on YouTube. But it's a very, very big component, and I'm dreading doing a video about that because it's so massive. It's doing a video about it, it's just going to be horrendous. So what I think of doing is I'll just show you bits and bobs about the form builder component as we go along, just to try and get you some knowledge about it. So like all of our class files, I'm going to be creating the declaration at the very top to say namespace. We're in the app directory. Now we're in the forms directory, right? And then we're in our client directory. Then we're in the security directory. This is pretty much how we define the namespace. It's like a trailing of the directory structures that we're in, right? Now, I'm going to be importing a couple of classes that we need in order to build out this actual form, and it's going to go like this. We say Magma. You say use MagmaCore, and it's going to be form builder, and I need a client form builder, just like so. So use MagmaCore form builder, and we also need a client form builder interface. Use MagmaCore, and I need a form builder, and I need a form builder blueprint, just like so. And the last one is MagmaCore form builder, and I need that form builder blueprint interface, just like so. So these are the four classes that we must import within any form that we're building, right? I'm going to show you how we're going to be laying them out. Say class, I'm going to say login form. Also good to note that whatever you name your file, it's good practice to also name your class that particular name as well, right? So like what I've named my form login form, my class is also going to be called login form. So it's login form, and we're going to be extending the client builder, right, which is going to implement the client builder interface, client form builder interface, just like so. And you can see we're getting that red squiggly bracket, or that red squiggly line, which is screaming at us. And let's hover over it and see what it's saying. So it's saying class must be declared abstract or implement the method create form, right? So this is what this interface does. It forces us to create that one method that we're going to implement in all the forms that we're going to be building. This one method has to be implemented, and it's the only method that that interface contains, and it's the only method that we're going to be using within this particular form. And it's called, and it's a public, public function, and it's called create form, right? And we must also follow the convention that these interface asks for, because how it's being done is that we're using these methods. They're being used, or they're being looked for in different component to get the output of the actual method to do something different. And I can think of one component that does such thing, and it's the schema component. It takes the output of what this method returns to help build different stuff. So, but we're going to go through all the arguments that we also must pass through this actual method. But let's try and get this auto-completed. Let's take this out. Let's see if it's going to auto-complete for us. Public function create form, and there we go. It auto-completes the method for us, and it passes in all the required argument that this method contain. And you can see it takes in 3 arguments by default. The first is a string, which is the action, which is the action attributes on any form where we're posting that form to, right? The second argument is a nullable object, and this says data repository. Now this argument actually returns an object of data. For example, if we are working on edit form, once we've got a token ID in that URI, we can take that ID and actually get the data from a database that is relevant to that particular ID. And the third and last argument is also a nullable object. It's the actual controller class that is using this particular form, right? These are the 3 arguments. The first 2 is optional. Oh, the second and third is optional, but the first is a required argument, right? Because we always need to know where we're going to post that form to. Now also, all of our forms also must contain a constructor. So I'm going to define a constructor. So it's going to be a public function constructor. And you can see it auto completes for us again. So we sort of like got the default argument, which we're not going to be using. We're going to be putting our own default argument in, and you can see it takes a string, a nullable string, right, that equals to null. So what we're going to be passing into here is our form builder blueprint interface. So let's clear that out. We're going to say form builder blueprint interface. We're going to say blueprint, just like so. Then we're going to be creating a private property, like so. And we're going to say form builder blueprint interface blueprint, just like so. Then we're going to pipe or cast that constructor variable to that property. Say blueprint equal blueprint, just like so. So I'm going to take this out. Don't need that. Just going to leave the empty parent construct. So what the blueprint object does, it provides us with some abstract method that we can easily call to help build our form. Like for example, we could call the text method, which is going to return a text input, or we can call a checkbox method, or a select method, or text area method, which is going to return the relevant HTML to render such an input, right? That's what the blueprint object contains, a lot of helper functions to help us print the various different inputs that we can use. And the constructor as well, we can also pass in any other dependency that we might need for our forms. And as we go on, you're going to see that there's other dependency that we can pass in. And because this form builder object is part of the dependency container, any dependency we pass in the container will be auto loaded for us, along with any other dependency that dependency depended on. Hope that makes sense, right? So we can pass any other type into class, and that will be auto loaded for us as well. So the to do implement the create form method. So how do we go about doing that? You can see that this method returns a string, and you'll find that all of these methods, they've got a return type, and if you're not returning the right data, you're going to get an exception, right? So what are we returning? We're going to be returning a lot of the method that we got in our form builder component, and this client form builder is simple extend into that main form builder component, and what that does, it provides us with that gateway from our application point of view for us to access the various different methods that we need to build our forms, right? So the first method within the form builder component we're going to be calling, we're going to return this giant method. So I'm going to say return, to say this form, right? Now all the method that we're going to be using to build our form, the old chainable method, the old chaining method, which means at the end of these method they're returning back the current object, so we can then chain on another method onto it, right? Now this form method is the first method within that chain, and this also takes an optional argument of, well, which is an array, right? And you can imagine we create an HTML form. What we can do with this particular argument is that we can override any of the default attributes you get with any form, like the method, the action, etc., etc. We could add classes onto it or ID, right? So by default, I'm going to say action, and I'm going to pass the action argument, which is the first argument we've got within this create method, right? We're passing that action straight to our form argument action attribute. So I'm going to pass a class suite as well. So I'm going to say dash class. So you can imagine if you're using Bootstrap or UI or whatever CSS framework you got out there, and you want to give your form some class, this is pretty much where you do it from. But because I'm using UI kit as default, I'm going to say UK form horizontal, right? And that's going to create a nice horizontal form for us. Now, as I was saying, these are all chainable method, and the next method I'm going to chain on is the add repository. Now the add repository method takes in the repository that is directly linked to this particular form and controller. So we're working on the security controller, which means this is going to be fetching data from a user's database or a user model, right? Which is what the data repository is. It's getting data from that user model. So for example, if we're working on a permission form, the data repository argument within that form will reference the permission model. That's pretty much how I've set it up, right? So I'm going to pass this data repo argument straight within that add repository method. And what that's going to also do for us is that internally, it's going to give the form builder component access to that particular model, right? The next method that we're going to be putting on is the important method, because this is the method that we use to add the various input fields to build our form. And this is called the add method. And we could put as much add method for as much inputs that we require. And what I'm going to do, right, I'm going to use that blueprint object to bring in the necessary input type that I need to render. So I'm going to say this blueprint, which is the same property that I've declared at the very top. So the form builder blueprint interface will get access to that form builder blueprint. See if I'm calling that properly actually. So actually the form builder blueprint, it requires a concrete object. So that's why I've passed it in at the very top. So we're casting the property to the interface, right? But the implementation in the constructor is the actual concrete object. So that's essentially what the variable is looking out for. So if, for example, if we're using another form builder blueprint which does not implement that interface, then we're going to get an error, right? That's essentially what's going to happen. So we'll pipe that property to that argument, which allows us to use the method within that blueprint object. And the first method that I'm going to fetch is the email method. So let's say email, which is essentially going to return a text input with the email type assigned to it. Now, these methods themselves also contains arguments, and the first argument that I'm going to specify is the actual name of that input, and the name is going to be email, just like so. The second argument is going to be a class that we can declare on that particular input, and you declare that as an array. So I'm going to say open and close bracket, square brackets. I'm going to say UK form width large, right? Now there are other arguments that we can pass in, and I will go through those as we go on. All these different methods, they've got a different amount of arguments. They've not all got the same arguments, but the first and the second argument is always going to be the name and the class, right? So I'm going to add another add method onto here, and this is going to be blueprint, and it's going to be password, because that's the tool field that we need for our login form. We need an email field and we need a password field, right? And I said the first argument is always going to be the name of the actual input type. So it's going to be password hash, and I'm going to also give it the same class, which is going to be UK form width large. So you can imagine you could specify different width or height for individual input type based on how you want it to look. Right, now the add method contains, well, the add method got 3 arguments. This is essentially the first argument. There are another 2 arguments that we can pass in, but I don't want to sort of like spill it on you right away. I want to sort of like go through it as they're required, and I think they're going to be required for this password field that we're rendering. And I'm going to put this on a separate line for easily, so we can easily read what it's doing. So the second argument I'm going to put is I'm not using, so I have to declare it as null, because I want to get to the third argument, which is going to be another method that we can define from the blueprint object. It's going to be this settings, just like so. And this contains a few arguments, and I can't remember exactly what they are in order off the top of my head, but this actual third argument is to do with manipulating how that input looks on your browser. For example, we can change, for example, when you render an input, it will take the name of the form by default. Like for example, this is called password hash. You might not want your field to be called password hash. You might want to change that name to like this password. We can do that within the settings blueprint method, which I should have declared blueprint, just like so, because that method is defined within that blueprint object. So if I try and hover over it, I actually get a pop-up which you can't see, unfortunately, but the pop-up showed me all the arguments that we can declare. And the first one I'm going to set to false, and what that is, it's an inline icon that we can display within the actual input itself. I'm going to say false for now. The second one is going to be false as well. I think that's false as well. It's over there again. It's going to be a string, so I'm going to say null. And that is the actual icon you could pass in. And it could be something from Font Awesome or Ionic or whatever font you've got installed. You could pass the name to that second argument to display that actual icon. And the third argument is going to be the label, so we can, which is a string, so we can rename that input to something else. And you can see it's popping up as we go on. So show label, and I want to rename that label to password, right? And that's pretty much all I want to do at this point with this particular settings method. As I'm saying, there's two other arguments that we could pass, but that's not required on this particular input. So the next method, I'm going to add another had method, actually. Say had, and that's what's going on with this squiggly bracket. We get actually, I've missed something right here. So the fourth argument should have been whether or not we want to show the label or not, so which is going to be a boolean. So I'm going to say true because we want to show the label, and the fourth argument is the actual label that we want to override, by what we want to override it to. So show label will mean we can disable the label completely if you don't want to show the label above your input. But if we want to show it, set it to true, and then we could rename that label to something else, like what I've done right there. The third add method we're going to be using is the submit button. We need to get a submit button. We're going to say this blueprint, and this is called submit, just like so. And we're going to be passing in a couple of arguments. And the first one we're going to be passing in is the actual name of the submit button. And there's also a convention to this as well. So I'm going to be saying index security. Now, the convention when you naming your submit button is to actually give it a name separated by an hyphen. So the first prefix is going to be index, which is going to be referenced in the index method, because that's where this form is going to be submit from, the index method, separated by a hyphen followed by the name of your controller, which is going to be security, right? That's the convention for naming your submit button within this particular framework. So we'll say index hyphen security. So for example, if it was on a edit route within a, say, a user controller, we will say edit hyphen user. That is the convention for naming your submit buttons within your forms, right? And the second argument is going to be a class. So I'm going to say UK button. We're going to say UK button primary, which is going to give it a blue background color. And the third argument is the actual name of your button. So we're going to call it login, just like so. And I've also missed out one above here, which is going to be a little checkbox, so we can check if we want our password to be remembered, which is an entire different story on itself, which is something we're going to get into later on. But we're going to add the fourth add method, or the third in this sequence, but fourth overall. I'm going to say this blueprint, we're going to say checkbox, just like so. And what we're going to be doing is the first argument is always going to be the name. So I'm going to say remember me. The second argument, we're going to leave it as an empty array, which is going to be the class. And the third argument is going to be false, which is going to be the value. We're going to set that to false, which is unchecked by default, right? So what else do we need to add? On the end of our last add method, we need to do the build method, right? And let's add that in to say build, and we're going to end it right there because that's the end of the form. And what the build method does, it allows us to pass in some wrappers, some container wrappers for each of our input elements. So I want to say empty array, to say the first argument, I'm going to say before, to say div, and say class, to say UK margin, and we also want to do, should do a wraparound here as well, quotes. I need a quote right here. I'm going to say after, which is going to be the closing element, closing div element. Now what this is going to do is going to wrap this div element around each of our inputs. So it's going to be able to create a bit of space in between each element. And that is essentially how we create a form. That's it. There's no, we didn't have to touch any HTML. It's all very object related. By calling methods and chaining them together, we can actually create the form that we need to display our login form. So we're going to come back to our security controller, and we actually want to fetch this form. So to say use, we're in the app directory. I'm going to say forms client security, and we want to get that login form just like so. So now that we've we reference or import that login form within our security controller, we're going to pass that to our as our local dependency, and we're going to be putting that within this add definition method, right? So we'll declare that by passing in an array, and this is how we're going to declare all of our local dependency. So I'm going to call it login form, and I'm going to point to that login form that we've just imported. Say login form : class. And that is essentially how we reference our classes within our add definition. So the login form becomes the property that we call within our index method to get access to that particular login form object, right? Now that's essentially how we create a form, and we're going to actually first dump that form out within our index action just to see what it's going to print out, and then we're going to be tidying it up. So in our view method, I'm going to create the context, or the second argument. I'm going to say login form, and I'm going to point to that form. So I'm going to say this login form as what we've just created up here. That's how we reference it. Then I'm going to be calling that create method. So our create, what was it called again? Login form, create form, right? And call the create form method. And remember, the first argument is going to be the action where we're going to be posting this form to. So for now, I'm going to put a dummy action because we're not actually posting it right here. I just want to see what how it's going to render on our front end. Say security index. So we're pretty much just pointing it back where it is. So we're going to go to our login form. We're going to go to our template below. I'm just going to render that form out and see what it looks like. Login form, just like so. Just switch my screen and let's reload and see what it brings up. And there we go. We just did that. There was no HTML involved. We didn't have to write any HTML. We simply built our form within a class and just render it to our template. So let's actually go in and remove index security, because you can see that it's showing stuff that we don't want it to show. We don't need a label above our button, so we can go in and we can actually disable that. So back into my editor, we're going to go back to our login form, and we're going to be calling up our button. We're going to put that on a new line so we can see a little better. And again, we want to jump past that second method because we don't need that method yet. We will do at some point, and I will explain to you what that is when we come to use it. But what we want to get to is that third method, to say this blueprint settings. No, remember the first argument is going to be whether we want an inline icon or not, which is going to be false because we don't, because this is a button. The second is the icon itself, which is going to be null. The third is if we want to display that label, and that is what we're going to be setting to false, right? So I'm going to say false because we don't want it to be displayed. So if I save that, let me go to the front end again. Let's see, and reload. Change my screen. Let's reload. So you can see that text, that label is gone. We no longer have that label, which is exactly what we want. And at the minute, you can see there's no CSS styling because we've not imported any CSS nor JavaScript in. But that's not really that important at this moment. We just wanted to build that login form just so you can see the process of how we go about doing that. So go back to our controller. We can see all the process, but obviously this is not, well, not obvious, this is not how we're going to be rendering this particular form to the screen. There is a new syntax that I've created, which is what we're going to be using in majority of our action method, which is a lot cleaner and a lot simpler. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to explain to you all the different parts to it.